I never imagined the proudest day of my life would begin with 3 empty chairs. The sun was out that morning, one of those picture-perfect May days where the world seems to cheer you on just for making it this far. The campus lawns were filled with students in caps and gowns, parents clutching bouquets, families wrapped in hugs and camera flashes. I stood in line with my fellow graduates, my heart pounding, not with nerves, but with something heavier: hope. A small, trembling kind of hope that this time, maybe just maybe they'd show up. When the names were called and we filed onto the stage, I scanned the crowd eyes searching for my father's gray suit, my mother's coral scarf. Nothing. My row was called. I walked with practiced grace hands steady, even though my stomach twisted itself into knots. And then I saw them 3 reserved seats in the front row untouched. No jacket draped over the back, no half-finished coffee cups, just 3 chairs like placeholders for people who had chosen not to come. At that moment, something shifted inside me. A part of me had always known deep down, but standing there in full regalia with a gold valedictorian sash across my shoulders and no one from my family to witness it, it was no longer just disappointment. It was clarity. They didn't forget. They didn't get lost in traffic. They didn't oversleep. They chose not to come. I walked to the podium as the dean announced my name, his voice booming with pride over the speaker system. My classmates clapped, some cheering, others wiping tears. My heart should have been full. Instead, it was folding in on itself quietly, carefully. I took out my speech, the one I'd practiced over and over in front of the mirror, the one Mrs. Lancaster, my writing mentor, had helped me refine, the one my roommates had stayed up late helping me rehearse. The speech about resilience, about chasing dreams, about how far we'd come. But in that moment, staring out at a sea of strangers in 3 silent chairs, I realized something. I didn't want to tell the story I had written. I wanted to tell the truth, the kind of truth that echoes in the hearts of those who've been overlooked, the kind that sits quietly beside children at dinner tables while their siblings are showered with praise. The truth that no award, no title, no perfect GPA can erase the ache of being unseen. And so I took a breath, I looked into the crowd and passed it. And I began again. Long before that graduation stage, long before the speech that changed everything, there were smaller moments, quieter ones that shaped me. And most of them happened inside the same 4-bedroom house with blue shutters and a welcome mat that always lied. I was the firstborn daughter, Rachel Monroe, and for the first 5 years of my life, I believed that meant something, that I was special simply for being me. Then my sister Brittany arrived, all curls and dimpled cheeks and laughter that filled the room like music. From that moment on, the spotlight shifted. Permanently. It's strange growing up in the same house as someone and living completely different childhoods. Where I was expected to be mature, responsible, and composed, Brittany was encouraged to be expressive, charming, the center of attention. When I got an A, it was met with a nod and a new set of expectations. When Brittany brought home a B- and a doodle-filled notebook, my parents beamed like she'd discovered penicillin. She's just more creative, they said. Rachel's the serious one. I became the helper, the planner, the shadow. At 8, I overheard my dad telling a neighbor Brittany's the life of the party, but Rachel. She's solid, dependable, quiet. And somehow that felt less like a compliment and more like a sentence, as if my place in the family had already been written and I'd been cast in the role of background support. That's the trap of being the eldest. You're handed responsibility early sometimes, before you even understand what it means to be a child. It wasn't Brittany's fault. She didn't ask to be adored more openly or defended more fiercely, but the pattern became clear. I was the blueprint, she was the bright new update. Every family dinner, school project, and holiday became a careful balancing act. I learned to shrink myself to play the role they needed: well-behaved, high-achieving, low-maintenance. I thought if I just kept being good enough, I'd earn the kind of love Brittany receives so freely. Years later in therapy, I'd come across the phrase golden child and ghost child. It hit me like a thunderclap. The golden child becomes the symbol of pride, the mirror of a parent's ideal self. The ghost child? She becomes invisible, useful when needed, invisible when not. I finally had words for something I'd carried like a second skin. But back then, all I knew was that no matter how hard I tried, I always felt one step behind, in a race I hadn't agreed to run. That imbalance didn't just affect me. It shaped my relationship with my sister too. We were never enemies, but we were never truly close. There was always a quiet undercurrent of competition neither of us admitted aloud. And as we grew older, the divide grew too subtle but sharp. I wonder now how much of that was orchestrated by accident, how much was the byproduct of adults who didn't know the damage favoritism could cause. The lesson I carry from those years is simple, but profound love isn't something a child should have to earn. And yet, when it's handed out unevenly, you start to believe that maybe you're just not lovable in the same way. Maybe you have to try harder, be better, shine brighter, and even then you might still be unseen. I didn't know it yet, but those early dynamics would follow me into every classroom, every friendship, every relationship until one day they didn't. But that unraveling would come much later. Because first, I needed to understand just how deeply I had internalized the belief that love was conditional. And that realization began to take shape the day I watched my sister receive a standing ovation for a dance recital she barely practiced for, while my state science award sat unread in a drawer. And that's where we'll go next. Children are incredibly adaptive. When affection feels scarce, they start looking for patterns, ways to earn the smiles, the nods, the rare words of affirmation. For me, that pattern became achievement. I was never the loudest, the prettiest, or the one with the most Instagram-worthy hobbies. But I could get straight A's. I could win spelling bees, science fairs, and essay contests. And every time I did, there was a brief flicker of attention like a porch light turning on, just long enough to think someone might be home. My parents never missed Brittany's cheerleading meets. But when I placed first in the district debate tournament, I rode the school bus home alone. The congratulatory text came 4 hours later from my mom. Good job. Sorry, work was crazy today. So I kept going. I loaded my schedule with AP classes, volunteered for every leadership role, and stacked my resume like scaffolding, hoping it would eventually lift me to eye level in their hearts. It worked, sort of. At family gatherings, I became the smart one. Relatives would ask what college I was aiming for, what scholarship I'd won. But those weren't real conversations, they were updates, headlines. No one asked how I was doing, just how I was performing. It's a lonely thing to be praised but not truly seen. The danger in achievement as love is that it builds a trap of your own making. You start to believe that rest equals invisibility, that failure, any failure, is proof you don't deserve affection. So you push harder. You tie your worth to every grade, every title, every perfect outcome. And when those things inevitably falter, as they always do, your self-worth crumbles, right along with them. I remember one spring semester in college when I got my first C on a midterm. It was a challenging statistics class, and I'd spread myself too thin. I opened the grade portal and felt my throat tighten, not because of the grade itself, but because I could already hear the silence it would receive. I cried that night not for the mark, but for the emptiness behind it. Jessie, my roommate, found me curled up with my laptop still open. She sat beside me and said softly, "You know you're allowed to be human, right?" At the time, it didn't feel like I was. But her words stayed with me. That was the beginning of a new realization. I had mistaken performance for identity. I wasn't my GPA. I wasn't a list of accomplishments on a resume. I was someone who had value even when I didn't earn it. That understanding didn't come all at once. It took time, missteps, therapy, and a few people who kept reminding me I was enough without a gold star beside my name. But looking back, I see now how deeply I needed someone to say, "You don't have to prove you're worth loving. You already are." And yet, even as those seeds were planted, I still held on to one hope that maybe if I achieved something big enough, bold enough, visible enough, my parents would finally show up. That hope would come roaring back when I opened an email 3 weeks before graduation and saw the word that had always felt like a finish line: valedictorian. When I saw the email, I thought my heart had stopped. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations, valedictorian." I clicked it 3 times just to make sure it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't. I had earned the highest GPA in my graduating class, securing not only a title but the chance to speak at commencement, my voice, my words on the biggest day of my academic life. For a moment, I just sat there in my dorm room, stunned. After all the late nights, the sacrifices, the years of chasing invisible praise, this felt like proof that I was enough. And more than anything, I wanted to share it. I picked up my phone and called home. My mom answered on the fourth ring, the sound of a reality show echoing in the background. "That's nice, sweetie," she said when I told her the news. I explained what a valedictorian was again. She paused, then pivoted mid-sentence to talk about how Brittany had just been invited to a local fashion event. I waited. My dad's muffled voice came through the phone, "Congrats, Rachel." That was it. No questions, no follow-up, just static space where warmth should have lived. Still, I held on to hope. I spent that weekend designing handwritten invitations, carefully lettering each one in gold ink. For my parents, I added a personal note. "It would mean the world if you could be there. I'm giving the speech. I'd really love to see you in the crowd." I even drove 2 hours to hand deliver it, timing my visit for a quiet dinner. But Brittany dominated the conversation as always while my carefully decorated envelopes sat untouched by their plates. Before I left, I asked them again, "May 15th, 11 a.m., you'll be there, right?" My dad nodded absently, wouldn't miss it. And that was the lie, because 3 days before the ceremony, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice carried that familiar tone, the one people use when delivering a minor inconvenience like rescheduling a dental appointment. "We've had a really hectic month," he began, "and with all the traffic, we're just too tired to make the drive." I didn't even respond right away. My brain couldn't compute the words. Too tired. Too tired to attend my college graduation. Too tired to hear my speech. Too tired to show up for the daughter they'd spent 2 decades shaping to perform. I sat in silence long after the call ended. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just stared at the ceiling trying to figure out how it had happened again. How I had worked so hard to become the person they always said I should be, only for them to choose something else. Again. It wasn't until the next morning as I scrolled through Instagram out of habit that the truth landed like a blow to the chest. There they were, my mother and Brittany in matching white robes, smiling in a luxury spa lounge. The caption read, "Mother-Daughter Day. So needed this. Photo after photo, facials, champagne flutes, a gourmet lunch." While I had been crying alone in my dorm room, they were celebrating. Not with me, around me, as if I had never mattered at all. And that's when it all clicked, not just the moment, but the pattern. The countless times I was sidelined, the birthdays overshadowed, the milestones skipped. I had mistaken exhaustion for indifference. But this wasn't about being tired. This was about choice. And somewhere deep inside me, something hard and quiet snapped. Because if they weren't going to show up for my greatest achievement, then just maybe it was time for me to stop showing up for their version of love. And that's when I opened my laptop, deleted the speech I had carefully rehearsed, and started again from scratch. Next came something they couldn't ignore. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a heartbreak. Not loud, not explosive, just still. Like the moment right after a glass shatters when everyone stares at the floor and no one speaks. That's how it felt sitting alone at my desk, the soft hum of my dorm heater, the only sound in the room. The speech I'd written, the one filled with optimistic metaphors and polished lines, was still open on my laptop, but it no longer felt like mine. It sounded like someone else, someone still hoping. That girl was gone. I stared at the blinking cursor, then moved my hand to open a new document. Blank page, blank slate. This time, I wasn't going to write what they wanted to hear. I was going to write what I needed to say, about being overlooked, about being the quiet child whose achievements were never loud enough to compete with someone else's charm, about learning the difference between attention and love, applause and presence, and most of all, about realizing that silence can be both a wound and a weapon. That night, I wrote as if my younger self were watching 8-year-old Rachel clutching a science fair ribbon, while her parents gushed over her sister's participation trophy. I wrote for the teenager who cried quietly on the bus, home from another missed awards ceremony. I wrote for the college freshman who stared at her phone, waiting for a call that never came. And with every word, I felt a layer of fear peel away. By morning, I had something real, something raw. Not the speech of a perfect daughter or a polished graduate, but of a woman who had finally stopped pretending she was unbothered by being unseen. I printed 2 copies and slid them into my folder. One, the original speech just in case I lost my nerve. The other, the truth. When Jessie saw me that morning, still in the same clothes, she wrapped me in a hug and said, "Whatever you decide, it's your day. You get to take up space." She was right. For too long, I had edited myself down to fit someone else's comfort, making sure I didn't seem ungrateful, dramatic, or too emotional. But maybe, Just maybe it was okay to be all those things. Maybe it was okay to let people be uncomfortable with my truth. That's the thing about silence. When you finally break it, it echoes. And the next day, standing behind the podium with the whole world watching, I chose the version of my story that didn't protect anyone's feelings, but honored my own. What happened next changed everything. When the dean called my name and I stepped up to the microphone, the world blurred for a moment. Rows of graduates, proud families, professors, in colorful robes, all a soft buzz in the background. I unfolded the speech hands, trembling, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. For a split second, I hesitated. The original speech was still in my folder, safe, polished, expected. But I looked out toward the front row at the 3 empty chairs with their reserved signs untouched, and I knew which version needed to be heard. I began slowly, voice steady, but low. 4 years ago, I arrived here hoping to find not just knowledge, but visibility. The words floated over the crowd and something shifted. Heads tilted, eyebrows lifted. I could feel it. They were listening not out of duty, but curiosity. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse. But I spoke the truth. About the loneliness of being the dependable child. About the quiet ache of knowing your milestones will always come second to someone else's mediocre moments. I talked about love that feels like a transaction and applause that echoes hollow when the people you need most aren't there to hear it. And finally, I looked straight into the live stream camera and said, to those who chose not to show up, not just today, but for the last 22 years, this is me showing up for myself. There was a long, stunned silence. Then someone clapped, then another. And before I knew it, the entire auditorium was on their feet. People were crying, some openly wiping their faces, others clutching each other's hands. I don't remember walking off stage. I only remember the feeling of being lighter, as if I'd set something down I'd been carrying my whole life. After the ceremony, classmates hugged me, thanked me. You said everything I've always felt, one whispered. Even faculty approached me. One professor, eyes glassy, said, my daughter needed to hear that. Thank you. But the applause wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. By that evening, clips of the speech had gone viral. The university shared it on their official page. Alumni reposted it. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. A woman from Oregon I'd never met sent me an email. I watched your speech with my 15-year-old daughter. We both cried. Thank you for putting into words what we've lived. Of course, not all responses were kind. Some called it too personal, inappropriate for the occasion. A few accused me of being bitter, ungrateful, selfish. But I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was the phone call that came 2 hours later from my aunt. Rachel, she said gently, your mom's crying. Your dad is furious. Brittany is demanding to know why you'd humiliate the family. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the phone against my cheek like it might bite. I didn't humiliate anyone, I whispered. I told the truth. And that was the truth. The speech hadn't created the problem, it had exposed it. That night, I didn't sleep much. My phone kept buzzing with reactions, opinions, support, and outrage. But beneath the noise was a growing sense of calm. I had broken the silence. Finally. And while that would come with fallout, it also came with freedom. The next morning, though, I'd face a confrontation I hadn't fully prepared for. One that would come not through a screen or a phone, but standing face to face with someone I never expected to see in the parking lot. My sister. The parking lot was nearly empty, its silence interrupted only by the rustle of leaves and the distant clatter of a cart being wheeled across campus. I had returned to the auditorium to retrieve my forgotten diploma cover, one final errand before closing this chapter. But as I turned the corner near the entrance, I saw her. Brittany. She stood by the glass doors, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her designer purse slung too perfectly over her shoulder. Her eyes, usually bright and confident, were rimmed red, her mascara smudged at the corners. It took me a moment to believe it. My always put-together sister looking undone. You really had to make a scene, didn't you? She said before I could speak. Mom hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. Dad says you made the family look like fools. I opened my mouth, but the words caught. There was no script for this part. What did you think would happen, she went on, that people would clap and suddenly you'd be the victim? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the printed screenshots, the Instagram posts from the spa day, the champagne toast, the dinner they had planned while telling me they were too tired to come. I handed them to her wordlessly. She stared at the images. Her face shifted not to guilt, not yet, but to confusion. I didn't know she murmured. They told me it was just a quiet weekend. I thought you were fine with it. You always act like you don't care. I met her gaze, because if I didn't act like I didn't care, I'd spend my life grieving a family I never really had. Something in her cracked. She sat down on the cement step, suddenly smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders sagged and the tears came fast, mascara streaking down her cheeks in uneven lines. I didn't ask to be the favorite, Rachel, she whispered. It was exhausting. Every time I made a mistake, it was a crisis. I had to be perfect for them. I always felt like I was walking a tightrope. It was the first time I saw Brittany not as the girl who got everything, but as someone who had been handed a role and told to play it perfectly. We both sat in silence for a while. Two sisters who had grown up in the same house but lived entirely different stories. We weren't rivals. We were reflections mirrors of what the other had missed. I never hated you, I said finally. I hated the imbalance, the feeling that I had to earn what you were given just for existing. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I think I knew, she admitted, but it was easier not to see it. If I admitted how unfair it was for you, I'd have to admit how fake it felt for me too. In that moment, something unspoken passed between us. Not resolution, not forgiveness, but recognition. Maybe that's where healing begins, not in apologies, but in finally seeing each other clearly. And though I didn't know it then, that conversation, raw and imperfect, would be the first fragile step toward building something we never had before, a real relationship. But before that could happen, there was one more reckoning waiting for me. My parents. I returned to the dorm expecting a quiet goodbye, just me and my last few boxes. Instead, I found my parents waiting in the hallway, flanked by disappointment like old friends. My mother stood stiffly, clutching her phone, her lips drawn tight in a line that used to mean you're making this harder than it needs to be. My father, arms crossed, radiated impatience. It was the same posture he took with customer service reps and delayed flights. We've been waiting an hour, my mother said curtly. You didn't answer our calls. I was at the auditorium, I replied, unlocking the door. Picking up the diploma you were too tired to see me receive. Inside, Jessie paused mid-pack. Her eyes met mine, worried, steady, and she started to slip out, but I caught her arm. Stay, I said softly. I needed someone in the room who wasn't rewriting the story as we went. My parents followed me in the silence thick with years of unspoken things. My mom went first. Your speech was inappropriate, she said, voice low but sharp. We've received so many calls, your father's colleagues, friends, even your aunt. What were you thinking airing family business in public? I turned to them, something inside me strangely calm. I was thinking I've been quiet for 22 years, and maybe it was time someone listened. My father bristled. We supported you, paid for your school. Partially, I interrupted. Scholarships covered most of it, and support isn't just financial. I tracked every event I had junior and senior year, 40 in total. You showed up to 8. My mother laughed, defensive, brittle. You kept records. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared but never expected to use. I kept proof. Because every time I brought it up, you made me feel crazy. Like I was imagining it. I laid out birthday cards, photos, printed calendars. You bought Brittany a car at 16. I got a bookstore gift card. You rearranged vacations for her schedule. I missed the Northwestern writing workshop because you planned the Bahamas that week. And when I protested, you told me to find another program. The room went quiet. Why didn't you ever say this before, my mother whispered. I did, I said, voice breaking. You just didn't hear me. You only heard what you wanted. That I was fine, independent, low maintenance. But I wasn't. I was hurting. My dad shook his head. So the speech was what revenge? No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. It was clarity. You didn't see me when I was quiet, so I decided to speak. They shifted uncomfortably, years of control slipping, and then unexpectedly the door opened. Brittany? She didn't look at me. She looked at them. She's not lying, she said. You always made it about me, and I let you. But she's right. You only saw what you wanted to see. For the first time, we stood on the same side. My parents didn't know how to respond. The room that had always belonged to their version of the story now held 3 authors. They left with vague promises to talk later, visibly shaken. I didn't expect a miracle. I didn't even expect change. But for the first time, I had said it all, fully, unflinchingly, in my own voice. And that's when I realized sometimes being heard isn't about changing someone else. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to keep the peace. But the real shift, the one that truly surprised me, came after they left. Because Brittany stayed. After my parents left, the silence in the room felt different, not heavy, just honest. Brittany stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the street below, like it held answers. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner," she murmured without turning around. I knew, I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have a perfect response. Healing I was learning rarely came with neat bows or movie-worthy resolutions. It came in small moments like that one where someone finally saw you without turning away. The summer after graduation moved quickly. I found a tiny walk-up apartment in Brooklyn and started my first job at a digital magazine. I went to therapy, something Tom gently encouraged, and Jesse helped me research. My therapist, Dr. Levine, specialized in family dynamics and emotional neglect. She didn't try to fix things. Instead, she gave me tools to recognize the patterns I'd spent my life swimming in. One session in particular stayed with me. I had just shared a new guilt spiral, feeling selfish for not returning my mom's latest call. Dr. Levine smiled gently and said, "It's not selfish to protect your peace. It's healthy. Healing isn't a staircase, it's a spiral. Sometimes we revisit the same wound with a little more strength each time." That reframed everything. I stopped expecting clean slates and started allowing messiness. I answered some texts from my mom, ignored others. I took space, I breathed, I cried sometimes without knowing why. I laughed at things that used to feel heavy. Brittany surprised me the most. She began texting memes, job leads, random things that felt like small olive branches. And one day, she sent a photo of her new apartment in Manhattan and added, "Maybe you could come help me paint." It was the first invitation that felt unspokenly equal, not as the forgotten sister, not as a burden, but as someone she wanted to spend time with. And so we began again, slowly, imperfectly, like patching a quilt with mismatched thread. We talked about childhood, about expectations, about how exhausting it had been for both of us, her carrying the weight of being the golden child, me carrying the ache of being the invisible one. We didn't fix everything. Some days the distance reopened, but other days we made progress, a shared laugh, a phone call without tension, a memory that no longer hurt. That's what healing really looks like. Not perfection, not forgiveness on demand, but movement. Tiny, gentle movement in the direction of something new. And that movement eventually opened a door I never expected to walk through. Because months later, I received a letter from someone I hadn't heard from in weeks. My father. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was written in my father's handwriting, neat, slanted, businesslike. No return address, no preamble. Just Rachel and then a paragraph that stopped me cold. "I've been thinking about what you said. About how I showed up or didn't. About what I expected from you and what I withheld. I don't agree with everything you said at graduation, but I realize I can't ignore that it came from somewhere very real. And maybe some of it is true. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was more honesty than I'd ever seen from him. He admitted he'd felt threatened by my independence, frustrated by how I seemed to succeed in all the places he'd once failed. "I wanted to be proud of you," he wrote, "but I think part of me also resented how easily you seemed to do what I couldn't." That line lingered with me for days. We met a few weeks later, neutral territory, a cafe near his hotel during a business trip. The conversation was awkward at first, but then something softened. He asked questions he'd never asked before. What I loved about writing, why I chose New York, what I hoped for next. And for once, I didn't shrink to make him comfortable. I didn't need him to validate me anymore, but hearing him try that mattered more than I expected. Later that month, I received a package from my mother. Inside was a photo album labeled Rachel. It held pictures I didn't even know existed, me at science fairs spelling bees curled up with a book on the porch. In the front, she'd written, "I see you. I always did. I just didn't show it the right way." Again, not an apology, but a step. That's what I've learned family can be. Not perfection, not always present, but capable of trying again if you're willing to redefine what showing up looks like. Now, Brittany and I meet for coffee every other Sunday. We text about bad dates, new jobs, and shared memories we're finally brave enough to examine. She's no longer a rival in my mind, just my sister learning right alongside me. And as for me, I mentor interns at my magazine now. Young writers finding their voices in a world that often tells them to quiet down. I tell them what I wish someone had told me earlier. Your voice matters, even if the people closest to you never clapped. One year after my graduation speech, I was asked to write an essay titled Invisible Daughter. It went viral. Strangers messaged me saying, "You told my story too." And that's when I realized my truth wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who's ever felt invisible in a room full of people who claim to love them. If that's you, I want you to know you're not alone, you're not broken. And most importantly, your worth isn't up for debate. You don't have to keep earning what should be freely given. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to take up space. And you are allowed to build the kind of family that sees you fully finally and without condition. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever sat in the quiet of a celebration wondering why the people who should love you most didn't show up, I want you to know you're not alone. Leave a comment and tell me what's a moment in your life where you finally spoke up or wished you had. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. If this video gave you even a little courage, insight, or comfort, please tap the like button. It helps this message reach others who might be carrying invisible pain just like I once did. And if you're navigating complicated family dynamics or learning how to heal from conditional love, consider subscribing. We tell stories here that aren't always easy, but they are always real. Because healing starts when we stop whispering our truths and start saying them out loud. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, exactly as you are. Thank you for being here.